Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
On my 45th birthday, I was handed a cheap plastic trophy by my daughter that read, "World's #1 failure," and they all laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. I sat at the head of the dinner table, the man of the house, as Tina used to call me back when we were still playing pretend in our little suburban castle. She was wearing her usual wine-stained smirk, eyes glued to the phone in one hand while she passed me the cake with the other. Our daughter Emily, 17 going on 35, gave me that damn box like it was some kind of Joke of the Year award, and our son Jack giggled, not even fully understanding the punchline, just knowing it was okay to laugh at Dad these days. I held that thing in my hands like it might suddenly change into something else, maybe a new job, or a hug, or just a little respect, but it didn't. Just some made-in-China crap with gold paint chipping off the sides and sharp plastic seams. I smiled, said, "Wow, thanks," like it didn't cut me to my core, and then I blew out the candles on the cake they barely bothered to frost. I don't even think they knew what kind of cake I liked anymore. Chocolate. It used to be chocolate, right? Or maybe German chocolate with that weird coconut topping Tina hated. After the cake, they all wandered off into the living room like nothing happened, like the trophy was just a gag gift and not the clearest message I'd ever received from the people I was supposed to mean something to. I sat there alone with half a slice of dry-ass cake and the smell of burnt candles hanging in the air. I listened to them laugh at some sitcom rerun, their voices overlapping with canned laughter from the TV, and I could feel something break in me, quietly, the way ice cracks before it splits. It wasn't like this used to be my life. I had a business once. A decent one. Home renovations, remodeling, a little contracting on the side. Built my way up from a beat-up Ford and a garage full of tools to a two-crew operation. We did kitchens, basements, patios, the works. Clients loved me, word of mouth kept us going strong, and for a while there, I felt like a man with a purpose. That was before the housing slowdown hit, before layoffs became the norm, before Lenny and I split up the business when he moved to Denver with his new wife and a better offer. I told Tina I could hold us together. I meant it. I picked up side gigs, worked under the table, pawned half my damn tools just to keep the lights on. Tina called it scrambling, said I was wasting time instead of figuring things out. Like what I was doing wasn't figuring it out one exhausted day at a time. She stopped asking how my day was. Started asking if I'd applied at Target. Started sighing louder and louder every time I walked into a room, like my presence was a reminder of some mistake she made years ago. Emily picked up on it first. She started calling me Chief in this snarky little tone, like I was a cartoon dad from some dumb sitcom. Jack just followed along. I was never much of a disciplinarian, and after a while, even that role got stripped from me. I became background noise in my own house. Something that gets in the way of the remote. That night, after they were done with their show and their laughter and their half-assed celebration, I washed the dishes while they scrolled their phones. Nobody offered to help. Not even Jack. I stared out the kitchen window, looking at the backyard I built with my own hands, the deck I stained every spring, the swing set I bolted together, the grill I repaired 3 times after storms wrecked it, and I felt like I was visiting someone else's life. When the kitchen was clean and the house had gone quiet, I went upstairs, brushed my teeth in silence, and crawled into bed next to Tina, who was already snoring softly under the glow of her phone screen. I lay there, staring at the ceiling fan turning in slow, tired circles above me. My chest felt tight, like someone had parked a truck right on top of it, and my eyes stung but refused to cry. Maybe that would have been easier. Crying would have been a release, some kind of signal that I still had something left inside. Instead, I just lay there, breathing through my teeth, thinking about how I'd become a ghost in a house full of people who didn't even notice when I disappeared into the background. I used to be Dad the builder. They used to wait at the window for my truck to pull up. I used to come through the door and get tackled by squealing kids who just wanted to tell me every single boring thing they did at school. Now, they don't even look up. I could have walked out the front door that night, and I doubt any of them would have noticed until the trash didn't get taken out the next morning. At some point, I got up, padded barefoot down the hall, careful not to wake anyone, and sat at the dining table again. I put the plastic trophy in front of me, stared at it under the dim light, and laughed a little. Not a real laugh, more of a bark. One of those dry, humorless ones that feel like sandpaper in your throat. Then I opened my laptop, logged into my old email account I hadn't used in months, and typed the subject line, need help. I sat there for a long time. Thinking. Planning. Not exactly sure of the details, just knowing something had to give. Something had to change, because I couldn't keep living in a house where I was treated like a punchline. That night, as they laughed at some dumb show in the living room, I opened my laptop and started planning my escape. The morning after my birthday, I woke up before anyone else, not because I had somewhere to be or anything important to do, but because I couldn't sleep through the constant churn of my own thoughts. I made coffee in silence, skipped breakfast, and sat at the table staring at that damn trophy again, now sitting crooked on the edge of the fridge like it had earned its place next to expired condiments and magnets from dentist offices. I didn't touch it. I just stared for a while, thinking about the strange weightlessness that comes after a decision has finally settled in your bones. Something inside me had snapped, quietly and with no drama, like a string pulled too tight for too long. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just started moving. That same day, I drove 30 minutes out of town to a small credit union with no branches near our neighborhood and opened a checking account in a different name. Well, not a fake one, just my middle name and mother's maiden name. Something nobody would recognize unless they were really looking. They didn't ask many questions. I told them I was between jobs and going through a divorce, which wasn't technically true yet, but I figured I'd get there eventually. I spent the next week bleeding money out of our joint accounts like a slow leak, just a few hundred at a time, spread out every couple of days so the alerts wouldn't ping too loud on Tina's end. She didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't care enough to bring it up. I sold my old power tools on Craigslist, ones she didn't even know I still had, meeting buyers in parking lots during the day while she thought I was at Home Depot getting parts for busted faucets and squeaky doors. Then I reached out to Lenny. We hadn't talked in years, not since he moved to Colorado and started a landscaping business with a guy he met on a job site. Back then, I thought he was crazy, leaving everything behind, starting over in his 40s, working with strangers in some mountain town. Now it didn't sound so crazy. He picked up on the second ring. No small talk. Just, "You okay, man?" And that was enough to break whatever was left of my pride. I told him I was thinking about making a change, that I needed to get out for a while, maybe forever. He said I could crash at his place and start helping with jobs if I wanted. Said there was no pressure, just an open door. That was the first kindness I'd felt in months, maybe years. Every morning that week, I played the role. I got up early, made breakfast for the kids, even laughed at Tina's half-assed sarcasm as if it didn't land like a hammer in my chest. I fixed a leaky sink, cleaned the garage, replaced a screen door she'd been nagging about. Every action was rehearsed, like lines in a play I'd performed too many times. I didn't want to tip anyone off. I didn't want to be stopped. I bought a burner phone from a gas station near the highway, paid cash, and kept it off until I needed it. I moved important contacts to that number: Lenny, the bank, a few old friends who might matter again someday. I packed a small duffel bag and kept it in the back of the garage behind some paint cans no one had touched in 5 years. At night, I started writing a letter. Just a page. Nothing dramatic. I didn't want to explain myself too much because honestly, I didn't owe them an explanation. Still, I wanted to say something, so I scribbled out the basics. I was leaving, I was safe, and I didn't know if I'd ever be back. I made sure to leave the letter vague enough not to be traced, but clear enough that they'd understand this wasn't some kind of breakdown or accident. This was deliberate. I withdrew everything I could. Savings, checking, retirement. In total, about $7,500. Which, if you break it down, was enough to cover me for at least 8 months at $150 per week. Not a lot, sure, but enough to breathe. Enough to think. Enough to not feel like I was drowning every second of every day in a house where no one noticed if I existed beyond the chores I hadn't done. The night I left, I kissed them all goodnight like nothing was different. Emily was still scrolling through TikTok with her earbuds in, Jack was halfway through a video game with the volume too loud, and Tina had passed out on the couch with a wine glass half full on the side table. I stood there in the doorway for a few minutes, looking at the scene like a museum exhibit, the failure and his family, frozen in time. At 2 in the morning, I slipped out the back door, duffel over my shoulder, wedding ring left in the bathroom sink like a shed skin. I didn't take much, just clothes, cash, and a copy of an old photo I'd found in a drawer of me holding the kids when they were still small and smiling. That version of me felt like a stranger now, someone who lived a long time ago in a house where people laughed for real. Next morning, Tina woke up to find the bed empty, my wedding ring in the sink, and a post-it on the fridge that said, "Don't worry, I finally listened." By the time Tina realized I was actually gone, I was already 3 states away, eating a gas station breakfast sandwich in the parking lot of a motel that smelled like mildew and old regrets. The air was thin out there in Colorado, but it felt like I could finally breathe for the first time in years, even if the motel sheets were scratchy and the coffee tasted like burnt rubber. Meanwhile, back home, everything was unraveling faster than I could have expected, and maybe, deep down, I wanted it to. Tina called the police that morning, probably expecting them to treat it like an emergency, like maybe I'd been kidnapped or wandered off into traffic like some dazed fool. But when she told them there was no sign of struggle, no foul play, and the note I'd left clearly stated I'd walked out on purpose, they gave her a case number, a tired shrug, and told her I wasn't technically missing. I just left. Voluntarily. Which, as far as the law was concerned, was my right. That part must have driven her absolutely insane. For years, I had been the steady, silent fixture in that house, the unpaid handyman, the disposable ATM, the apology machine, and now, without warning, I wasn't anymore. She called my phone 36 times that first day. I know because I checked the records later, when I felt like torturing myself. After the calls came the texts. They started off angry, then turned pleading, then back to rage again. She called me a coward, a joke, a selfish bastard. Then she called me her husband, her partner, the father of her kids, like she'd suddenly remembered who I used to be. I never responded. Not once. Silence, it turns out, is more powerful than any speech I could have delivered at that kitchen table. At some point, Tina must have logged into our banking apps because the messages turned venomous real quick. The checking account showed 0. The savings also 0. The last deposits had been made weeks ago, and the slow withdrawal trail was all mine. She must have tried using her credit card that afternoon, probably for one of her regular Target runs or to order delivery instead of cooking, and found it declined. Her world was starting to crack, and the glue she'd pretended was still holding everything together, me, was gone. Emily took to Facebook the way most 17-year-olds do when they feel slighted. She posted a picture of our front door with a caption that read, "My dad dipped." Can you believe that loser left us, followed by one of those crying laughing reactions that made me wince more than the words themselves? I saw it all from the account I'd made the week before. Different name, different email, a stock profile pic of some mountain range. I was invisible but watching. I smiled bitterly at her post, not because it didn't hurt, but because at least she wasn't pretending anymore. I had been the family joke long before that trophy. They'd just finally said it out loud. Jack didn't post anything. He just disappeared from the internet for a few days. I like to imagine he was confused, maybe even scared, maybe lying awake at night wondering what he did wrong. That part ate at me more than I wanted to admit. He still had softness in him, still looked at the world with some wonder, and I hated that I might have stolen that from him. But I also knew staying would have drained whatever light I had left to offer. Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is stay just because they expect you to. Meanwhile, I was sweating my ass off in work boots and jeans, cutting grass on a steep slope in the outskirts of Fort Collins, where Lenny had lined up a job for me on his 3rd day back from vacation. He handed me a rusted weed whacker and said, Time to see if those old hands remember how to work. And they did. My back ached, my knees popped every time I bent down, and by the end of the first day, I smelled like gasoline and wet leaves, but I felt more alive than I had in a decade. There was something pure about it. No fake smiles, no silent dinners, no expectations besides showing up and doing the job right. I came home with dirt under my nails and sweat stinging my eyes, and I smiled into the motel mirror like I was meeting myself again after years in someone else's skin. Tina kept calling everyone she could think of. My old friends, my old boss, even my brother, who hadn't spoken to me since our dad's funeral. Eventually, word got back to my former employer, a guy named Rick who once ran the contracting business I subbed under before everything fell apart. He texted me, just 6 words. "Bro, your wife's gone nuclear." Apparently, Tina had shown up to the office in her bathrobe, mascara running down her face, screaming about how I'd abandoned the family and left her with nothing but bills and no money to pay them. She caused such a scene that someone actually called security, and Rick had to walk her out to her car. She parked crooked, by the way, blocking 2 spots like she was still the queen of something. I read that text while standing in the middle of someone's yard, the mower still running next to me, the mountain wind cutting through my shirt. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in ages, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous, because it was loud and messy and dramatic, the kind of thing she always accused me of being when I got upset about things that actually mattered. And then I went back to mowing, one slow line at a time, smiling like a man who finally stepped off the ledge and landed on something solid. Long before I stepped out the back door for good, I started covering my tracks in ways most people don't even think about until it's already too late. The escape wasn't just physical, it was digital, financial, emotional. I went through every folder on the old family laptop, deleted backups, scrubbed browser history, pulled photos off cloud storage, even changed passwords to accounts nobody knew existed. I had old drives tucked away from my contracting days, full of client invoices, photos of deck repairs, and tax documents, none of it illegal, but all of it unnecessary now. I tossed them into a burn barrel behind a storage unit on the edge of town and watched the data go up in smoke, one file folder at a time, the crackle of plastic casing snapping like old bones. My Facebook profile? Deleted. Twitter? Gone. LinkedIn was the first to go, and honestly, it felt the best, like cutting the last tie to a version of myself I couldn't stand anymore, the desperate guy still pretending to be open to work, while silently wondering if he'd ever feel useful again. I had left no digital breadcrumbs that could lead Tina back to me, and I made damn sure of that. No location tags, no shared devices, nothing that could be traced through the smart home crap she insisted we buy 2 Christmases ago. Every shared bill, account, and subscription service had my name wiped clean off, like I'd never existed in that house at all. When she tried to file a civil suit a few weeks later, claiming abandonment and financial misconduct, it didn't go anywhere. She marched into some lawyer's office, probably in that same wine-stained hoodie she wore when we used to argue over grocery receipts, and tried to spin it like I'd stolen from her. But I hadn't. Every cent I took came from accounts that were legally joint, and I could prove it. No credit cards opened in her name, no shady withdrawals or secret loans, just a slow exit, one that I had planned with the kind of patience you develop from years of being ignored. She must have expected to find some trace of me still clinging to the edges of our life together, some sign that I was unsure or that I might come back. But there was nothing. The garage was half empty, the closets thinned out, the junk drawer missing half its contents. I'd even taken the flashlight from the kitchen just to be petty, just to leave one more thing they'd all taken for granted missing when they needed it most. When the police wouldn't take a report and the lawyer told her she didn't have a case, she tried social media next. She posted photos of our wedding, long captions about betrayal and cowardice, vague threats about karma and justice that made me roll my eyes from 3 states away. The comment section was split, half her friends saying I must have been cheating, the other half cautiously saying they never really liked the way she spoke to me. While all that noise echoed online and through the empty halls of our house, I was renting a room above a garage in a quiet little mountain town just outside of Fort Collins. The place was small, one room, creaky floorboards, a kitchenette with a stove that took forever to heat up, and a bed that sagged in the middle like it had held one too many bad decisions. But it was mine. The garage belonged to a retired guy named Ron who spent his afternoons fixing old motorcycles and offering unsolicited advice about carburetors and women, usually in that order. He didn't ask many questions, just handed me the keys, pointed to the breaker box, and said rent was due on the 1st. Cash only. Just the way I liked it. I spent my mornings with a thermos of black coffee, sitting on the steps overlooking the yard, reading old paperbacks from a thrift store shelf and pretending the world hadn't gone completely to shit. No alarms, no chores, no guilt trips over taking a nap or forgetting to bring in the mail. I cooked for myself badly, but it got the job done. Rice and beans, eggs on toast, sometimes just cold sandwiches and a beer if I felt too tired to care. It was the most peace I'd had since the kids were in diapers. There were no screaming matches, no passive-aggressive digs across the dinner table, no one reminding me of all the ways I'd fallen short. Just me, the mountains, and the sound of Ron's motorcycles rumbling to life every other afternoon like thunder rolling through steel. I still worked with Lenny a few days a week, landscaping gigs mostly, occasionally helping with tree removal or fence repairs, and though my hands were raw and my back ached like hell most nights, it felt good to move again. It felt honest, like the kind of work no one could take away from you or laugh at you for doing. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night thinking about how far I'd fallen, but more often, I thought about how far I'd come. They used to want me to be everything at once, a clown for their amusement, a butler to clean their messes, a walking wallet to fund their every whim, and when I stopped being useful, I stopped mattering. That realization had sat in my gut like a stone, cold and heavy, until I finally pulled it out and looked at it for what it was, the truth I'd ignored for far too long. They wanted me to be a clown, a butler, a walking wallet, and when I couldn't be that anymore, I became worthless. Now, I lived on half the money, in a space 1/10 the size, with no cable, no couch, and no one telling me to be quieter or better or faster or stronger. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't wake up feeling like a failure. It had been nearly 6 months since I walked out the door of that house, leaving behind my name, my family, and that plastic trophy still sitting crooked on top of the fridge, probably gathering dust right next to Tina's unpaid bills. In that time, I'd built a life that was small but entirely my own, and every day that passed without someone nagging me or rolling their eyes at my existence felt like one more brick in the foundation of the man I was slowly becoming. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the pretending. And I sure as hell didn't miss being reminded, in one way or another, that I wasn't enough. Then one afternoon in early spring, I opened my email for the first time in weeks and saw a subject line that stopped my hand mid-scroll. It just said, "Can we talk?" and the sender was Emily. The name alone made my stomach twist, not out of fear or sadness exactly, but out of that old, quiet ache that comes when someone who used to think you were a hero now barely thinks of you at all. I stared at it for a while, reading it over and over like it might change, like maybe it was a trick or some scam, but it wasn't. It was her. I didn't answer right away. I let it sit for 2 more days while I worked a fencing job up in the hills, digging post holes and measuring boards under the kind of sun that turns your neck into leather and your thoughts into something simple and clean. But eventually I typed back. I told her I'd meet her in a public place, somewhere neutral and not too close to where I live now. We settled on a coffee shop just off the interstate, halfway between the mountains and the mess I'd left behind. She looked different when she walked in, thinner than I remembered, pale under her makeup, with eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in a week. She didn't hug me, and I didn't offer one. We just sat across from each other, coffee in hand, like two people meeting to discuss a business deal neither one of us really wanted to make. She talked first, mostly about Jack, about how quiet he'd gotten, how Tina had started yelling more, drinking earlier, sleeping less. The money was gone, the house was up for sale, and there were notices from the bank stacking up on the counter where birthday cards used to be. She didn't say, "You were right," but it was in the silence between her words, buried under the way her voice cracked when she mentioned how Tina cried over the bills one night and then turned around and blamed everyone else. I listened. I nodded. I didn't apologize. I told her I was safe, working, living simply, and finally sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic over bounce checks or cold shoulders. She asked if I hated them. I said no. I said I just couldn't be who they needed me to be anymore, especially when all they saw was someone who'd already failed them. She nodded like she understood, but I could tell she didn't, not fully. She was still young, still caught in the undertow of her mother's bitterness, still unsure who to blame for the collapse of a world she'd taken for granted. 2 days after that meeting, Tina found me. I don't know how exactly, probably pried it out of Emily or followed the return address on something I'd mailed, but there she was, standing outside the garage apartment in a hoodie and pajama pants, hair tied up in a mess, clutching her purse like it held the last pieces of her dignity. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just cried. Long, quiet tears that made her mascara run and her voice shake like she hadn't planned on any of this, like maybe she'd finally realized the man she treated like furniture was gone and not coming back. She told me she didn't know how much I did until it all stopped getting done. Said the house felt cold without me, the kids were distant, and she hadn't cooked a proper meal in months because no one ever said thank you anyway. She said she was sorry. That she was scared. That she didn't want to lose everything. She asked me to come home. Said we could fix it. Start over. I looked her in the eyes and didn't feel a damn thing. No anger, no sadness, no love. Just emptiness. A quiet, settled emptiness like the kind that follows a storm after everything's already blown apart. I told her something I'd been waiting to say since the day they handed me that plastic trophy. You handed me a trophy that said, "World's #1 failure." That wasn't a joke. That was a message. Loud and clear. She tried to argue, said it was Emily's idea, said it was meant to be funny, a gag. I didn't let her finish. I said the joke was fine, but the laughs afterward, the way no one looked at me when I blew out those candles, the way she sat back and let it happen like it was all deserved, that was the part one couldn't forget. She told me I'd abandoned the kids. Said I'd walked out on my responsibilities on them. I shook my head, leaned against the doorframe, and said what I'd been carrying in my chest like a burning coal for too long. I didn't abandon anyone. I left. There's a difference. You all just expected me to stay miserable forever. Then I pulled a folded check from my back pocket, $200, all I could afford to spare without falling behind on rent, and handed it to her without ceremony. She looked at it like it was poison, but she took it anyway, fingers trembling. I didn't say goodbye. I just closed the door behind me and let the silence stretch into something final. That evening, I sat on the back steps with a cold beer in one hand and my neighbor's old dog curled up at my feet, the sun bleeding down behind the hills like it was trying to set the whole sky on fire. I watched it drop slow, let the quiet settle in my bones, and felt a peace I hadn't known since before I started measuring my worth in paychecks and dirty dishes. Maybe I was a failure. Or maybe I just failed to see what they really thought of me. Either way, I'm free now. And freedom doesn't need a trophy.